Okay, shall we progress? So thank you everybody for joining us on what is our fourth in the second series of webinars from the Impact Research Group here at UEA. Today you will be hearing a presentation from colleagues looking at developing the shared values that are central to effective workplace cultures and allowing them to be good places to work. We are recording the session for those people that cannot be here, and it will be available at a later date should you wish to tap into it again or share it with others. For that reason, we ask you to put your microphones on mute to reduce the disruptions of emails popping in, as you can hear, and also to avoid any distractions of background noise for our speakers. So thank you so much. Keep an eye on the chat, put things in there, and my colleague Carrie will be helping to facilitate discussion and pick up key issues with the panel towards the end of their presentation. So use the chat facility. And I will now hand over to our panel, Jonathan Webster and Kate Sanders, who will introduce themselves. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy the session. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Sally. So good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 minute past 12, so I can say good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Webster. I'm Professor of Practice Development and co-director of the Impact Research Group at the University of East Anglia. And my colleague is...
Hello, I'm Kate Sanders. I'm a practice development facilitator at the Foundation of Nursing Studies. I'm also co-academic editor of the International Practice Development Journal.
Okay, thank you, Kate. So it's really great that you've been able to join us for our webinar today on developing shared values, which are central to effective workplace cultures that are good places to work. Behind webinars such as today's, there is always a lot of work that goes on as part of both the preparation and delivery. So I'd like to thank Heather Judson and David McCabe for their help and support, which is just invaluable. So thank you both. I'd also like to thank Dr. Maria McKay from the University of Wollongong in Australia and Leanne Batten-Smith, both who we will be hearing from a bit later. Maria and Leanne, your involvement in today's webinar is really appreciated, so thank you. As Sally has said, the webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. Cameras and microphones are switched off. However, please do post comments and questions in the chat box, which my colleague Carrie Jackson will be collating. Next slide, please, David. So today's webinar is focusing on the importance of developing shared values, which are central to effective workplace cultures that are good places to work. It draws on our work, so the work of Sean Cardiff from Fontys University, Professor Kim Manley from UEA and Kate, related to the Guiding Lights for Effective Workplace Cultures that was published in the International Practice Development Journal last November. And we'll be focusing specifically on Guiding Light 2, Living Shared Values. This work has also appeared as a chapter in the International Practice Development and Health and Social Care book published earlier this year. And this in turn grew from our publication in 2011 on effective workplace cultures, the attributes, enabling factors and consequences of a new concept. And Carrie has kindly offered to paste those links into the chat box for us. So in our January webinar of this year, Kate and I introduced the Guiding Lights for Effective Workplace Cultures that are also good places to work. Since that time, Impact at the University of East Anglia and the Foundation of Nursing Studies have been commissioned by NHS England and Improvement to run a Guiding Lights for Effective Workplace Cultures programme for community nursing and interdisciplinary teams across the 7 regions of England. Working with and working alongside those participating in the programme is a privilege and has enabled joint learning, understanding and insight into both culture and context in practice. And I'd like to welcome those participants and their teams who have joined us today for this webinar. During this presentation, Kate and I plan to explore the importance of developing shared values, which are intrinsically linked and central to effective workplace cultures. Drawing from the contemporary literature, we would argue that both developing and understanding shared values underpin sustainable, person-centred practice transformation. Maria and Leanne will also share their insights and thoughts a little later. Next slide, please, David. Our colleague, Professor Kim Manley, in 2004 identified that values and beliefs and/or attitudes are pivotal to many definitions of workplace culture, in which values and beliefs may be implicit or explicit. Fundamentally, they underpin the way things are done within any cultural focus. In 2013, Kim Manley and colleagues further identified the importance of exploring the values and beliefs we may hold associated with practice concepts, which is necessary if a common vision is to be developed, and ways of working that enable support and challenge of each other. And certainly within the practice development literature, you'll frequently read about how we talk about sort of high challenge and high support. Sally Hardy and colleagues in 2021 suggests that a critical dimension of working with values is ongoing continual restlessness, in that meaning requires constant refining, thereby constantly challenging our thinking. Therefore, it's fair to say that whilst we may live from a core set of multi-dimensional values, they can change and be influenced by different experiences in life, therefore reaffirming the need to constantly review, reflect, and understand. And certainly sort of using that term around continual restlessness in a way captures the movement of our values and beliefs, which are multi-dimensional, which aren't static or sort of one-dimensional. Can we go to slide 4, please, David? So this picture of a water lily describes how we might experience values as reflected in behaviours. On the surface of the water, what we see are behaviours. These can be seen and experienced in how we might act, and is usually reflective of who we are, our values, beliefs and attitudes, but it can also be influenced by other factors, such as the attitudes and behaviours of others, and wider influences, such as the setting or context in which we find ourselves. And I'm sure we all have experiences where we have found ourselves in different contexts and settings that has led to perhaps us behaving in a different way depending on that context or setting. I'm sure we can all think about our own experiences and how at times external circumstances or stimuli may have led us to respond in a way that may be at odds with our core values and beliefs. And I'm sure you have heard the term, and I've heard the term many times. They know just what buttons to push. And certainly we might have sort of life experiences of how perhaps certain behaviours might actually elicit a response from us, which might be outside our normal way of sort of how we live with our values and beliefs. Underpinning our behaviours are attitudes, values and beliefs. In the context of the water lily, they can be hidden from view because they are below the surface of the water. The attributes that we present are reflective of our values and beliefs through words and actions. So attitudes are made up of 3 components. Firstly, cognitive, so our beliefs. Secondly, affective, so our feelings. And thirdly, behaviour, learned associations, i.e. a behaviour that may be linked to a certain stimuli or experience. Values are centred on what makes us who we are as a person, what we think and believe to be important. These are the underpinning principles of our lives that guide our decision making, such as honesty, loyalty, fairness and equality as examples. Our values in many contexts will be influenced by our own experiences of life, our backgrounds and what we hold to be important to us as a person. Our beliefs are what we hold to be true and are developed from what we see, hear, experience, read and think about. These too can be influenced by our own life experiences, our backgrounds and what we hold as being core to who we are. And sometimes we'll hear this referred to as being the authentic self. So what does all of this mean? Understanding the root system of the water lily is key because it's where our attitudes, values and beliefs are. They're hidden from view, however, are fundamental to living shared values and being able to thrive and be authentic as a person. Next slide, please, David. So what happens if we're not clear about the assumptions and values that we may have? Can I ask you to post in the chat box what words come to mind when I tell you this is an image of a pit bull terrier? And just to say, there are no right or wrong responses. So please just put into the chat box what words come to mind. Lots of comments coming in. Okay, yeah, lots of words coming in and lots of terms and phrases, which is great, thank you. Yeah, please continue posting if you've got thoughts. So if we can go on to slide 6, David, please. So here are two images of the same breed of dog. How do we align our thinking from the first image to the second, or vice versa? What influenced your thinking when I asked you to post your comments in the chat box? Without acting with intent and being systematic in how we make clear our values and beliefs, we may assume that we all share the same values when in fact we don't. Linked to this are the values and assumptions that we might hold and how these might influence our behaviour in a certain situation. For example, drawing from this example, if we saw a pit bull terrier. And again, this sort of activity, when we look at sort of the wording that's being used, really sort of highlights how we see and experience things in a different way based on our own sort of attitudes, values and beliefs, and how that can be influenced by a whole host of different sources. Can we go on to slide 7, David, please? So according to Brendan McCormack and Tanya McCants, working with values and beliefs is key to delivering person-centred practice and is one of the prerequisites for staff within the person-centred practice framework. Brendan McCormack and colleagues go on to state the importance of staff being aware of the values, beliefs and assumptions that are held because of the impact on care. Clarification of values is one of the fundamental methods associated with practice development as a methodology for transforming individuals and cultures of care by making clear and explicit what otherwise might have been unclear, assumed or ambiguous. Within the context of developing effective workplace cultures, Sean Cardiff and colleagues identify that the collective process of identifying values encourages engagement and ownership and the building of person-centred relationships. Slide 8, please, David. As individuals, what level of importance do we place on developing shared values and what influences those values? I'd like to introduce Dr. Maria McKay to you and ask Maria to share her perspective. Can you play the film, please, Heather?
Hello everyone, I'm having a conversation with you today, well really with myself, about values. I'm Maria McKay and I work as Senior Lecturer at the University of Wollongong in New South Wales, Australia, which is located about 2 hours south of Sydney on the south coast of New South Wales. I'd like to thank Kate and Jonathan for asking me to share my understanding of values with you, and I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey as to how I understand them and what it's been like for me coming to discover my values. From reading the work on the guiding lights, I can see that the consideration of values from both a personal and organisational perspective is important from the concept of leadership. And in previous leadership roles that I have held, I absolutely believe it's a really important factor that helps guide us as a leader. Overall, I think understanding the values that guide us is really important as they allow us to be our best person in any context or situation. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge the country I'm sitting on to share a little bit of my culture with you. I'm a Wiradjuri woman, which means my ancestry is from Western New South Wales, and I was born on country in Wagga, New South Wales. I'd ask you to join me in paying respect to elders past, present and emerging, and share with you that I'm coming to you from Budawang country, which is Conjola. I live about 4 hours south of Sydney, in a beautiful part of New South Wales where the ocean meets the mountains. Budawang is the word for possum in Aboriginal language, and I'd like to acknowledge that this country always was and always will be Aboriginal lands. So why do I think values are important? The first question for me is, what are values? And there is debate in the literature about what are values and virtues. Some would argue that our values change over time. So if I think about myself at 18, in my 20s, 30s, 40s, and now in my 50s, my values have changed over time, but my virtues, which are the gems within me, have remained consistent. And I've clarified those to be compassion and courage. The work of Linda Popoff in the Virtues Project talks about virtues and about them being the gems within us. And we need to clarify and acknowledge them so that we can shine them. And in that way, we live our brightest and best life. We can refer to virtues and values. And in this talk, I'm going to use virtues when I talk about the gems within us. And I'm going to talk about values as a process of clarification and them at an organisational base level. So to start with, I use the concept of me, we. If you think of M-E, me, it's two letters that help us to focus on self first, because we are the first link. And we need to really think about who are we and clarify our personal values before we can see how we fit within the organisation and their values. We can only have 2 or 3 virtues that we hold close or that we think are our core. And that comes from some of the work of Brene Brown and many others who say that you can't have 6 or 7 things that you hold yourself accountable for. You can only have 2 or 3. From that, so for me, it's courage and compassion. And then how do I actually define the behaviours that associate them? What do I want to hold myself accountable for? And so that I can think about my actions and my behaviours, and that those virtues become more than just a word. I actually put them into how I choose to live my life on a daily basis. So if we take the letters M-E and turn M upside down, we get we. And we very much is about how do I, and from my personal values clarification, fit into the organisation or the community group I'm with or any other group that we've created shared values with. I think this is often a step that we miss, is the personal values clarification before we move to creating shared values. When I'm really clear about who I am and what my values and behaviours are, I can then look at and participate in one creating shared values, or go to an organisation that has already defined their values and see how I align with those. David Seedhouse would argue that the modern values-based approach to organisations, to values recruitment, is nothing more than asking people to lie to us, because if as an organisation we haven't taken that down to behaviours and actions, people are just trying to make up and fit into the organisation to get the job or to be successful or to just basically fit in. So again, we need to be authentic, consider the behaviours that elicit the values of the organisation and give them meaning, and for persons to have accountability in how we act in the workplace, and also for the systems and processes within that workplace to be accountable to our values as well. So I'd like to think about authenticity, and when I think about that, I think about living shared values. And Brene Brown talks about authenticity as a daily practice. So if we think about what are those behaviours that we've talked about, what are the values that we hold dear, whether it be personal or as an organisation, on a daily basis, when do I do that well? And when do I actually, when I didn't? And then have the courage to admit when we did it right and wrong. So consider a situation where you or someone said something that doesn't fit with your core values. You really have 3 choices. You can puff up or overreact, or you can shrink and disappear. Or thirdly, you can respond in line with your values. And Viktor Frankl, who is an Austrian neurologist, psychologist and Holocaust survivor, says, between the stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is the power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And if we breathe and reflect in the space between the stimulus and the response, we're more likely to respond in a way that's aligned to our values. The second concept I'd like to look at is true belonging. And when I think about that, it aligns to safe, critical, creative learning environments. If we want to create spaces that are safe in our organisations, where it is in essence a safe place to be critically creative and to learn, we need to engender true belonging. And there are two definitions of belonging. One is Maslow, and he defines belonging as meeting our basic needs. And, you know, I don't dispute that, because I really do believe that we do need to have our basic needs met, and we need to do that right from infancy. That's, you know, we need to be nurtured to grow and survive. But really, that's all about fitting in. Maya Angelou says, you only truly belong when you are free, when you realise you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. So to authentically belong, or to truly belong to ourselves or our organisations, we need to be clear on our values and our behaviours and be true to them even when it's uncomfortable. Brené Brown talks about this concept of choosing courage over comfort. So to create safe, critical, creative learning environments, we need to engender values, clarification, and a sense of true belonging. I feel this is strongly linked to creating helpful relationships within the person-centered practice framework, where from my research, a healthy relationship is evident when persons experience a sense of being in practice together while supporting each other to seek their full potential. I think we all need to clarify our values so that we can live authentic lives and be the best person we can be, whether it's at work, at home, or in any other context. And I also believe it takes a lot of courage to truly hold ourselves and our organisations accountable for how we act and the systems and processes that are in place. If we do this, as Maya Angelou says, the great sacrifice it takes comes with great reward. Thank you for listening, and I hope it gives you something to reflect on in regard to yourself and your workplace.
Thank you, Maria. And I know, Maria, you're here with us, even though it's very late in Australia. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective on virtues and values. And I think everyone would agree you've created a lot of moments for reflection and plenty for us to think about. So I'm just going to start by providing a quick overview to the guiding lights for those who weren't able to join the webinar, or as a refresher for those that were able. And then we'll go on to look more closely at guiding light number 2, living shared values. So the guiding lights were developed through a collaborative inquiry, and this involved health and social care practitioners working internationally. The focus of the inquiry was, how do we recognise and develop effective workplace cultures that are also good places to work? The inquiry drew upon principles from appreciative inquiry, practice development, and realist evaluation, and it involved Twitter chats, a workshop, and several rounds of reviewing, refining, and critiquing until the 4 guiding lights were finalised. The term guiding light was first used by Manley et al. As a metaphor for another term that has been used called simple rules. And Manley et al. Decided that the word rules perhaps sounds somewhat prescriptive, whereas the intention of guiding lights is to offer cues and encourage a more open and flexible approach, recognising that we all work in very, very different contexts. So the 4 guiding lights that emerged from the collaborative inquiry are shown in this slide. And alongside each of them is a tweet from the inquiry that offers an insight into the focus of what each of the guiding lights is. So collective leadership recognises the potential in all to be leaders. Living shared values is fundamental to guiding the way things are done in workplaces. Guiding Light 3 talks about safe, critical, creative learning environments, ensuring that culture is open to continuous learning and development. And Guiding Light 4, Change for Good That Makes a Difference, suggests a bottom-up approach to change, whilst also recognising the need for top-down support. Next slide, please. So this Guiding Light focuses on, this slide focuses on Guiding Light 2, Living Shared Values. Each of the Guiding Lights are presented in this way. So it describes the nature of the context when it's combined with which mechanisms results in which outcomes. And this language comes from realist evaluation. So when we're thinking about living shared values, the Guiding Light describes a context where the following values are fundamental to the way things are done. And the values that emerged from the collaborative inquiry were compassionate care, positivity, learning, interprofessional teamwork, and celebrating change for good. And obviously, if you undertook a values clarification process in your workplace, a different set of values might emerge. The Guiding Light also then goes on to identify a number of mechanisms or activities that are form part of the way things are done in practice by the caring teams to ensure the values that are identified are realised in practice. So what we say we will do, we actually go on to do. So for example, in the Guiding Light, we would see teams co-constructing shared values with patients, service users and communities. We would also see that staff were regularly revisiting these values to create collective goals and action plans. The outcomes for each of the Guiding Lights are then presented in the final column. And these are, in this Guiding Light, these are reflected from the perspective of staff and patients. So, for example, staff will talk about feeling valued and supported, and patients will say that they experience the caring environment to be warm and authentic. Next slide, please. So each of the individual Guiding Lights have intermediate outcomes that are specific to them. But when all of the 4 Guiding Lights are combined, several ultimate outcomes emerge. And I'll just give you a minute to read this slide. So when we're thinking about the ultimate outcomes, we're thinking about teams that are working well, that are flourishing, the staff are, have a sense of well-being. Care would be described as person-centred, safe and effective. Change would be driven by what matters and is important to people. And there would be effective partnerships outside of the team going across systems and structures, with an outward looking rather than just an inward looking focus within the team. Next slide, please. So to illustrate what this Guiding Light might look like in practice, I'm really delighted to be able to share a conversation that I had recently with Leanne, and I will let her introduce herself in this video. Can we start the video, please, Heather? So I'm really pleased to be here with Leanne. Leanne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Kate. I'm Leanne Batten-Smith, Deputy Manager at Rose Court in Radcliffe, which is an 87-bedded residential and nursing home, part of the HC1 group.
Thank you. And thank you for meeting with me to talk about Guiding Light number 2, which is about living shared values. And we were talking earlier about the importance of one specific value within Rose Court. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
We've been looking a lot recently about reflections and where we are as a home in a setting, from the higher senior management of the home down to the ancillary staff, and working together to reflect to make it a better working environment for better outcomes for everyone working there and the residents living there first and foremost.
So when you're talking about reflection, are you talking about the opportunities that you can be gained from reflecting in practice for learning and development?
Absolutely. When we first set out looking at reflections for the team, we didn't realise that this is something all of us do every day, but actually pinning that down and looking at it and being valued, I think, is the main thing. When we started looking at reflections, everyone in the home has got something to bring to the team, and it's about working on that, what works well, what doesn't, or what was positive, and what we may need to change or look at, or how we share that vision and value for the future for the setting. Great,
thank you. So you've got a specific example of what this looks like for one individual. So would you like to share that with us, please?
Yeah, so I told the individual that I would be using her for my case study for this talk. So basically what it is, we do a lot of working with staff in the home to try and get them to build and flourish into achieving and moving to senior management or different roles within the setting. And this was from a girl who came to us as an 18-year-old girl from college, wanted to work in a care environment because it was in a family background. She came to us quite shy at first, a lot of thirst for knowledge, but was very quiet in the background around that. We then worked with her to develop her. She completed her MVQ level 2 and has recently just done a level 3, at which point we had discussions and meetings with her about looking at progressing onto a senior care position in the home. She was very anxious at first and like, do you think I could do that? Do you think I could manage that? So then we just stopped and reflected with her of where she was when she came to us and what she's already achieved in that time with her MVQs and where she could be in the future, looking at her senior carer and then looking at to a nursing assistant and things like that in the future. If that is something she'd be looking to develop in, we're more than happy to support and guide her into doing that. And with that practice, we've been working on that, and she's actually just now completed the training as a senior care assistant in the home. And from that time now of her coming to us, asking questions, learning, not understanding of how to, she knew what something was, but she didn't know how to follow it through. To the point now, only last week, she's come to me now with an incident that had occurred. But rather than ask me now what she should do, she came to me saying, right, let me tell you what I think I should do. Is it this, this, and this? And then I just had to guide her with some little tweaks in areas and then just outcomes with her of where she thought she needed to document that, who she thought she'd need to inform. But now it wasn't to the point I was telling her, she came to all that realisation herself. For her then to message me 2 days later, realizing how much she's come on and achieved in that time, and she's just built in that philosophy to her understanding as well, and it's really powerful and embedding to see that practice.
So just thinking back to the guiding lights, it sounds like there is a culture within the workplace of really trying to enable people to learn and develop. And you do that every day in all of your conversations and your practice. So it's a constant process rather than kind of formalized learning. It's just an ongoing process.
Yeah, so we do it in both ways. So we do it verbally in meetings with staff teams. So if something comes out in the home, we do it as a team approach and say, you know, what's your feedback? What do you think? But we do also do it in written as well. So we do reflections within the home, written reflections. So if a specific incident has happened or a knowledge basis where we feel it's something very important that needs to be shared with the rest of the team, we reflect on how we got to that point and how we can share that with a wider team, and then look at that of what we may need to work as a team to tweak, change and adapt that of what works and what doesn't then in the future. So it starts with something and then it evolves and changes in time then as well.
So there's informal ways, but there's also more formal processes, and it sounds like it goes through all levels within the staff team within the home.
Absolutely, we're very much of we're not a hierarchy of a home. We're very much that everybody works there together and everyone's values are just as important as each other's, including the residents, because they're very, very much involved in their day-to-day care, how the establishment runs, and all of us are a part of making that a positive working and living environment.
Great. So thinking about outcomes, what do you think the outcomes have been for this individual person in terms of their learning and development?
Well, she's definitely got a voice now that she didn't have when she started. She seems a lot more empowered in the role that she's doing, very much more confident. It's a more positive atmosphere, because I think at the beginning, because she was quite nervous, she was a little bit anxious, so you could tell she was a little bit tense in an atmosphere. First time she did a meeting with a social worker or come to team meetings and had to speak as for her team, it was very daunting for her. But in this time, you're definitely seeing her flourish. The way she now supports and shows new care staff coming into the home, teaches them practice, and I think that was a great reflection to her, because she didn't realise how much she'd learned and embedded until she then had to share that with new staff coming into the home as well. And it's definitely a better positive working environment as well.
So it sounds like she's gained things for herself in terms of voice and power to make decisions, but it also sounds like other people are gaining too in terms of her increased confidence and what she's offering to the team and the wider learning environment.
Absolutely. And then when new care staff come to the home, realise she's only been doing that role for 2 months, they're actually took back and shocked by that, because she does come across confident and understands and realises the expectations of the role and the home, which obviously builds confidence in the new staff coming forward as well, of what they can achieve in such a short time as well.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that story, and please thank the member of staff for allowing us to use that as a case example.
No, I will do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leanne.
Thank you.
Next slide. Well, actually, no, sorry, David, just you can stay there for a minute. I've just been noticing the comments in the chat box. Thank you for that positive feedback. I agree. I think it's a really wonderful example of how a team that really has values, committing them to creating opportunities to learning and development at all levels of the organisation can really have an impact on an individual, but also more widely on the way things are done within that team. And I've actually visited them in the home several times, and it's palpable. You can feel it throughout the team. So it is a great place to be. But I think what's also interesting about that scenario is that we were focusing initially on living shared values, but I wonder if you could hear the other guiding lights woven through that conversation. So the idea about collective leadership and how that carer was becoming a leader, and how the possibilities for all of us to be leaders of something can open up. The commitment to developing safe, critical learning environments was evident. So that's guiding light 3. And then also guiding light 4, change for good. So this carer was reflecting in practice and was coming up with ideas about how things could be done differently. And that's what we're talking about, the seeds of making changes that will make a difference, depending on what's important and what matters to people. So I'm really grateful to Leanne for sharing that conversation with me. Next slide, please. So just thinking about the reality of living shared values, how do we ensure that we are truly living the values that we espouse, and that we are doing what we say we will do? And so evaluation is key. So if we, what approaches to evaluation might be helpful? So if we draw on the principles of practice development, we would suggest using a number of different approaches. So on the left-hand side of the slide, I put some suggestions of what some values within a team might be. And then on the right, some suggestions about some methods of evaluation. So when we're thinking about evaluation, I think we should be using approaches that give practitioners an opportunity to step back and question aspects of everyday practice that they might take for granted during the busyness of everyday life. And this opportunity to step back can help us to see things in new ways. And one method that is very useful for that is observations of practice. We also want to consider approaches that really give staff the opportunity to engage in the evaluation process as a learning opportunity, so that we move beyond just proving whether something has happened or not, or whether something has been done, to really thinking about evaluation as a way of generating knowledge and new understanding that we can then use to inform improvements. So an example could be listening to, capturing and sharing the stories of patient, families, staff and students, and engaging in dialogue about, so what does this mean for us? Does it reflect that we are living our values, or is there something that we need to pay attention to? It's also important when we think about evaluation to think about the multiple perspectives, to really challenge us to see things from alternative viewpoints. And then a really useful method that we can use in this case is claims, concerns and issues. Next slide, please. And I'm just going to draw your attention to some resources that are available to you that are freely accessible. Carrie has just put them up in the chat box. These are housed on the Fund's website, and there are a number of resources that help you to work with your teams to undertake values clarification, to create shared values, but then also to undertake observations of practice, to collect stories, to use claims, concerns and issues, and a variety of other approaches that can really help you understand the way things are done around here. Okay, so I'm going to hand you back to Jonathan now.
So thank you, Kate. I have to say that through both Maria and Leanne talking, I was sat here smiling at the computer, because what they both have shared is so immensely powerful and absolutely resonates with everything that we have been talking about and working with around shared values, but also effective workplace cultures that are good places to be, in which people grow, thrive and develop. So thank you both. Can I have the next slide, please, David? So from the guiding lights for effective workplace cultures, ultimately living shared values is about delivering better outcomes for all. A consequence is that staff feel valued and supported, have a sense of belonging, feel empowered to act and enjoy being at work. As one contributor to the guiding lights stated, a team that care for each other are going to shine with compassion and care for their patients too. So thank you. If we can go on to the final slide, David. So this is our contact details. We have about sort of 10 or 15 minutes for any questions or comments. Sally and Carrie, I know you've been watching very closely the chat box as well as Kate and I. Are there any particular themes that are coming out or questions that have been raised?
Yes, there's a really good question from Joe Bosencat. Let me just scroll back up to it. And Joe was asking how we can share this with the CQC to influence their inspections and move the conversation into a values-based narrative.
That's a big question.
Yeah, indeed.
I said typically just show them our YouTube channel as a starting point.
You know, there is something for me about how we alter a dialogue we talk in a different way. You know, how we look and present, how we look for evidence and how we present evidence as well. And in some ways, as you know, it's absolutely about systematic embedded systems, processes, you know, frameworks, but it's actually how we win hearts and minds as well about the importance of this, I think, and how we articulate ourselves around values, beliefs and attitudes, and how that really sort of helps both support our behaviour but also collective as well. Kate, I don't know, sort of, have you got thoughts?
Certainly at a practical level, I know at Rose Court, Leanne and the care home manager Karen, who contributed to the first webinar, they include all of this kind of information in their folders of evidence about the ways in which they work, and they've even included the links to the webinar, and they've got a copy of the conversation I had with Leanne, and that will be submitted to the CQC as evidence of their ways of working. And so that, you know, that's at a very ground level, but thinking about how we might start conversations with CQC at a more strategic level, yeah, it will require some thought, I guess. I don't know if anybody in the audience would like to contribute anything to the chat box, any thoughts or ideas that they have about how we could influence at that level.
I think Joe Odell has mentioned that we could influence CQC, but you know, the focus really is on looking at workplace cultures, and obviously this is illustrated a beautiful example through Leanne's video of how this has happened in action. But I think that there's also a comment, just hang on, I'm just trying to find it, from Ian Chorley.
Yeah, something I was going to say was just also around how we seek collaborative opportunities with CQC as well, because I think that's really sort of important when we think about sort of work that we are leading. How do we work collaboratively as a key partner with CQC? I do think that's sort of quite fundamental as well. Sorry to cut across.
I think Ian Chorley has provided an interesting question, and he's asked who are or is the person who sets the CQC agenda that could be approached to manage better conversation through inspections. And he suggests that sometimes other areas need to catch up to reach the same point around shared values. But I think there is that wonderful clash, isn't there, between inspection and measurement for measurement's sake and measuring what matters to people. There's quite a big divide there. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
I'm actually measuring, I don't like the word measuring, but evaluating to learn, so that there is a commitment to that continuous ongoing development, and checking out that you are consistently living your values and being authentic to your values, and also checking in with those values, as Jonathan said earlier on, about that continuous restlessness to ensure that the values that we identified as being significant and important to staff and the people that are receiving care are current and are still what's important and what matters. You know, I can remember the days when we used to do ward philosophies, and a side of A4 was stuck up on the wall, and you know, periodically somebody would go and wipe the dust off it, but it wasn't thought that actually anything else needed to happen. We've done it, we've done our ward philosophy, but no, it's not about that. It's about how we ensure that these are they are living as well as lived. Yeah.
I think the thing with, you know, sort of again, sort of just thinking about the CQC conversation as well, is, you know, CQC look for clinical advisors to join inspections. So what part do we have that we can play in really sort of influence this way, this view of, sort of the importance of values and the type of evidence that might be collected, and how do we sort of demonstrate it and really embed it in how we work and what we do, so that the evidence we're producing is really sort of, it absolutely captures the total essence of effective workplace cultures.
Yes, there's lots of comments coming in about a collaborative approach as a way forward for both groups, and suggesting that the CQC do look at values, but I think what we were talking about is the CQC also looking at their own values, not just the sites that they inspect. But Joe Adele's just said shared values are only effective if they're lived. Absolutely. But I think also Sally Hardy is suggesting that there's something about how we lobby and that we're activists for transformation, including how we influence political agendas together.
Mm. And a point, Maria made many really sort of important points through, sort of her presentation. And Maria, if you're still here, you might like to come on and say something about this, because I don't want to speak for you, but one of the things that really stuck with me was, I think you talked about authentic self and authenticity, and calling out and having the courage to call out when espoused values don't match one's own or the lived values. And again, there's something for us about how we do that, which feels sort of really important. Okay, you're not able to unmute, but there is that sort of real sense of authentic self, and how do we live those values and those espoused values,
particularly in contexts that may not be that may challenge those on a regular basis, and where there might be issues of power, and that can be very difficult.
There's a lovely suggestion from Deirdre Monroe that she thinks it would be valuable to share and measure the systematic value or impact across health and social care at micro, meso and macro level, and knowledge translation at an international level. So she suggested perhaps an international transformation ebook with stories of impact would be really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love that what you've just said, Maria, that you've posted. So it's about the challenge of making values more than words, but also purposeful turbulence as well. That image absolutely captures totally, I think, does in my mind. So thank you.
Somebody, Jeanette, she also posted a comment about large trusts having different ward areas with slightly different values. This does not mean any are wrong, but there is a risk that these will not always be harmonious. Is this wrong? I think that raises interesting questions as well in relation to trust values. So many trusts have a number of key values that they share, and so the assumption might be that anybody working in that trust will share those values, but where are the opportunities to come to a common understanding about what those values actually look like in reality, in practice? So quite often the benefit is achieved through the conversations, I feel, rather than just the words. It's about developing that individual understanding about what the values mean to you, and then coming together and creating that shared understanding about what those values might mean. And I would imagine in different teams within trusts, yes, there will be some similar core values, but perhaps relating to the individuals that work in the teams, the kind of services that you're providing. There perhaps will also be areas of difference.
It's a good point, Kate. I'm just writing up a case study that illustrates that for the IPDJ at the moment, which focuses on the disconnect between values that are espoused at the top of an organisation and the lived experience at Microsystems in teams and with caring for people within a large organisation. So that's really moving from fracture to flourishing and vice versa. So sometimes it's the dark side of leadership that has disenabling and disempowering consequences for people.
Yeah, which can have significant impacts on well-being.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that point around well-being is really important, Kate, as well, because it's also about self-identification. It's about identifying oneself, isn't it, when one's own values are at the end of the day at odds with what one is experiencing, and it's being able to recognise that, and by recognising that then gives one potential options to act rather than be passive and to not flourish. So again, that whole experience of recognising and working with one's own values and where they sit across organisations which are complex and one could argue are going to become even more complex with new models that are being developed. So, you know, this has always been timely and really important, but one could argue for the future it's going to become even more important. Christine Waters has posted a comment around experiences from a commissioning perspective as well, and again that is just really important. So thank you, Christine, for sharing that in the chat box.
And that really comes out in the guiding lights when we're talking about working across system structures, so that we don't silo work, because actually, yes, the values of commissioners can influence values within organisations and then filter down to values within teams. And so this conversation needs to be ideally a wider conversation so that there is shared understanding across systems.
Thank you both, and thank you for our contributors both in the chat, on the video, and the wonderful words that have been shared today in the webinar. That has brought a real sense of like you say, the impetus of this guiding lights framework that is being utilised across really complex organisations. So thank you, everybody. Maria, you can nearly go to bed now. Thank you for your contributions. Jonathan and Kate, thank you both for organising this very lovely insight into a very complicated piece of work that I know you spend a lot of time and have written about considerably. Just to remind people, we have another webinar coming up in a couple of weeks, and that's going to be hosted by Kim Manley and colleagues, looking at developing contextual readiness for transformation, and the example we'll be looking at is in maternity services. So continuing on the themes that you guys have picked on today about how to create that holistic framework, a facilitation framework that can address national agendas. So I think that will follow on very nicely from the work that you've outlined today. So thank you, everybody. Keep an eye on the Impact website on the UEA address. You should be able to find this webinar and our others in there. And if any of you are having trouble accessing some of the resources, then do get in touch with us as well, and we can willingly share what we have available to you. So thank you, everybody. Kate, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time again today. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week, and hopefully see you at our next webinar, which should be coming to you on the 16th of November, again at this time, 12 till 1. And like Jonathan said, thank you for the people in the background that also enable this work to happen. So thank you, everyone.